Do you have somebody in your life that you care for and love that is struggling with alcohol right now? Are you unsure of what to do about this? Are you concerned about what could potentially happen to them? Do you even question whether they have a problem or not with alcohol? Well, if you answered yes to even one of those questions, you're in the right place. This is the right video for you, and this is the right channel for you. Hi friend, my name is Bernie from Tiger Resilience, where we offer addiction solutions for family members and friends who have a loved one who is struggling with an addiction. And in this video, we're going to break apart what are the things that you can do to help somebody that you care for and that you are concerned with that is having a challenge or potentially is an alcoholic. And I'm glad that you took time out of your busy schedule to come check out our content, and also want to offer you nothing but the utmost respect that you're taking time to try to understand how you can help somebody right now who is probably struggling deeply with alcohol problems. It could be alcoholic or alcoholism or alcohol abuse. So what separates Tiger Resilience from the rest of the programs that are out there? The big corporate treatment centers, the programs that you can find online, there's a plethora of them. So what is it that separates us from them? And why would you pay attention to what I have to say? Well, let me explain this to you. First of all, our approach is a twofold approach. And this is one of the key things that differentiates us from a lot of these other programs. We are a medical and clinical driven team with over 50 years experience combined that is working towards a solution to helping individuals struggling with addictions. In addition to that, I am also somebody who struggled with alcohol myself many years ago, and I can share from a firsthand experience exactly what the challenges were, what that was like, in addition to the experiences my family had to go through. So this will be discussed in parallel paths, where we'll be talking about the clinical aspects of it, which is the educational, the pharmacological, all of the evidence stuff that is very, very powerful and is useful and necessary for you to understand. And I'm going to talk about it from the practical standpoint of the experience, the first person experience, myself, and also my 26 years of experience working with thousands of individuals who have struggled with addiction issues over these years. So that parallel approach is what created our program, the Tiger Resilience Addiction Treatment Program, that helps individuals and families to understand and to overcome addiction issues. So in this particular topic, we're talking about alcohol and alcoholism. So let's take a quick look. What is alcoholism? So alcoholism is potentially a genetic or biological disease that is passed down possibly from a generation or two generations prior. Could be a parent, could be a grandparent to the individual who is struggling with it. There are some other factors that also play into it. So I want to be guarded when I say that, because you could have been somebody who had a grandfather who was severely problematic with alcohol, could have been even full-on alcoholic himself, but yet you've never had an issue with that. So there are a lot of factors that come into play here, and we'll be breaking some of these things apart as we're going through this discussion. But first, just truly understand what alcohol does, what it is, and how we kind of get from A to B, from the use first time all the way to the addiction. If you would also like to learn more about addiction as a whole cycle, like what is the addiction cycle like, and this encompasses all different substances, please see the link above. And I'll also have a description below, because in there I will have the video that we have for cycles of addiction, and that will teach and educate you about all the practical parts in the cycles of what addiction is. For this video's sake, we're just going to discuss alcohol, and we're just going to take it a little bit more of a short-sighted, just so I can expedite the information for you as well. Because again, you can check out that video. The link will be below as well. So with that being said, alcohol, the first time somebody takes a drink, the first time that you ever had something in your body that was a psychoactive substance, you change this. There's a state change. There's a physiological state change, neurological, chemical, dopamine, all these factors kind of kick in, and you get that whoosh, that wow, that high, that buzz, that initial shot. Now, somebody who is struggling with alcohol certainly had that first experience too. But what happens, and this is what creates the condition, is as that person grows and continues on their journey, they may be drinking once a week, they may have a weekend, or they may even do it every other week, or maybe even once a month in the beginning. And then it turns into something a little bit more frequent, and maybe it's a couple of times a week, maybe it's a couple of times a month. Again, these frequencies are very variable based on the individual, the family, the lifestyle, and so on. But it does always end this way. If that individual is struggling with alcohol, it will start out as potentially a weekend warrior where they're drinking more than maybe they expected to drink, but yet they're functioning the rest of the week. And then it might be, well, you know what, I can pick up a drink on a Wednesday night. I'm okay. I'm going to work all day Thursday, and then I'm going to Friday night maybe go out, and Saturday go out with my friends, or, having something to drink here at the house. Then it becomes more frequent. Now it's about maybe every other day. Maybe it's a little bit more than they initially intended to drink. I was going to have a beer. Now I'm going to have 3 beers. I was going to have a glass of wine. Now I have 2 glasses of wine. Now I'm adding maybe some hard liquor involved with this too. What happens at this point is the individual is developing a tolerance, which means that as they continue to consume alcohol throughout the time frame, days, weeks, even months, their tolerance changes how much they need in order to keep continuing that little effect that they're getting, that state change, which means that they're going to be doing more, drinking more. Okay, so they're going to start out with 2 beers, and they might need 4 beers, and it might be going to 5 beers. When they cross this threshold, that's what they call dependence. And dependence is where if they don't use the substance, they're not going to be right. They're not going to feel right. Okay, this could potentially be a little bit of a hangover. This could also be agitation. This could be somebody having a little bit of shakes, possibly. There could also be some other things going on where they're just become disconnected. They can't function. They can't even kind of get up out of bed. These are definite signs where the dependence, if they don't use, is starting to show. And during that situation, that's where individuals will eventually go back to continue to drink. I've worked with people over the years where they put it down for a couple of days or a few days. As they are continuing to drink more, what is happening is now that tolerance is continuing to increase, they are becoming less and less able to not drink. So for instance, they might be able to put it down for a day or two, but you might see them very agitated. They could be very angry. They could be very lethargic. They could have some shaking going on. There's a lot of things that happen. I can share with my own personal experience early on in my alcoholism that if I was able to put it down for a couple of days, I would definitely have some shaking aspects, and it would be physical. That would create a discomfort. So with that being said, the individual can potentially have these signs. And so what they're going to do is they're going to return back to the drinking. Maybe that you're a spouse and you've given them an ultimatum, said, listen, you need to cut back on your drinking. Okay, I'll stop for a week. And they do. And they stop for a week, but they don't do very well during that week. They don't do very well physically. They don't do very well psychologically. There's, again, a lot of agitation potentially with it, or disconnect or depression. And then they go back to the drinking. So once they have crossed this, now an obsession starts to happen. Now they're consumed more and more with the day about when are they going to get their drink? When is that alcohol going to be? When am I going to get to have alcohol in my body again? Because it's actually, the body is actually calling out to need this continuation of this substance in it. So now this is crossed over from having a dependence issue into an addiction. So doesn't necessarily mean that behaviors have gone bad or something's happened to them, though that can be the case. It does mean that when they cross over to that addiction, is that the obsession has now become where they can't basically think or function or live without it. If you were to tell them that you'll never have another drink in the rest of your life, in a sense, you would probably send them into a tizzy. You would definitely send them into some fear. So in that early stages of addiction, as they're continuing to maintain their balance with the alcohol, they're also learning ways to how to cope with it with the environment around them. So for instance, when I started to reach my threshold and I was kind of getting to the point where I needed to drink constantly on a daily basis, I knew that my wife was concerned about this, and I would certainly find ways to hide what I was doing to the best of my ability. At least I thought I was, at the time. And in the early stages, I actually probably was. Eventually she caught on, but I would try to hide that. Those are indications right now that you've crossed over and there's a problem, because if you're trying to hide something, you're having a challenge with it. And I'd like to even go back and restate that if you have your loved one and they're saying that they can control it, and they're going to try to give you that aspect or that feeling that I can control this, I'm going to control this, well, that statement alone just already tells you they're out of control, because you don't try to control natural functions of our lives and things that we do. I use the example, if I have a glass of water in the morning, I don't have to control how much I'm going to drink, because I have my glass, I satiate myself, I'm full, I'm ready to go, and I start my day, and I don't think about it. It's just a natural process. I don't have to control. I'm only going to have a few ounces of water. I just have a glass of water. So this is a process in addiction, especially with alcohol, where the individual is really, they're starting to take on a whole new mindset about how I need to keep using that alcohol, but I got to keep some of this hidden potentially because I can't let the world know that. I can't let my boss know that. I certainly have to try and protect my family as best as I can. There's no malfeasance or there's no misintentions of trying to do wrong. It's just that when it gets to the addiction, they're trying to protect the pain threshold. And what I mean by that is that when they stop using, there's a pain that starts to come into play. And this is both physical and psychological. And that pain creates a very powerful void. And if you're familiar with pain, you'll do anything to avoid pain. And that's exactly what addiction is about. It's a pain management system. People have gotten to the conditioned rate with that substance where they're having pain. And in order to overcome that, what they have to do is they have to use the substance. That is, at its core, that is what addiction is. So now your loved one that you're concerned with, maybe some of the story I just shared with right now, they may have some of that going on with them right now. So what do we do about it? And first of all, how do you recognize it? So as I mentioned earlier, certainly that they're trying to hide it, that's one real big red flag. If they're like, oh, I'm cutting back, I'm not drinking today, or I'm only drinking on the weekend, and then you open up the curio cabinet or a buffet table cabinet or something, and then you find, half a pint of vodka or something hiding in there, and you're like, wait a minute, where did this come from? Well, that's an indication right now that they're starting to create stashes. In other words, they're hiding their supply in order for them to continue to use that, and that's a very powerful piece with alcoholism and certainly alcohol addiction. They will absolutely find ways to be able to continue their use. And that means being creative and finding ways to hide the alcohol. And I can tell you again from a firsthand experience many years ago, when I struggled with this, I found some very creative ways to hide the alcohol. I had rafter beams up in the ceiling in the basement. I had places outside in dirt. There was an endless opportunity to hide it, to the point where I quite honestly, I would almost forget where I put the stuff at times. And in fact, I would encourage you, if you want to learn a little bit more about this process too, there's a movie called Days of Wine and Roses from the early 60s. Jack Lemmon was in it. He stars in this movie, and it's about an alcoholic. And in that movie, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but in that movie, he hides alcohol in order to get back to it later on, and they can't find it. And they end up doing a lot of destruction trying to find that alcohol, in a sense. So with all that being said, that hiding is definitely a signal that something's going on. There's an indication that there's a problem here. Other things could also include agitation. They could have a change in their demeanor, and you'll see a change in them. They will actually start to become a little bit of a different person. There'll be something going on, and you won't be able to put your thumb on it necessarily, but you'll see that in their affect. You'll see that in their behaviors. You'll see that in how they respond to you and how they talk with you, in a sense. In addition to some of those changes in those behaviors, they could have some mood changes too as well. They could be very depressed. They could be extremely anxious. A lot of times they may even start to isolate. Another indication is that they're actually spending a lot more time alone. They're disconnecting from social events and friends and things that they used to do regularly that they had a good time with, but they've now disconnected with it. I can share from my own personal story, again, from my personal experience with this, that, I had certain things that I used to love to do, and I started to stop doing them because I was in the throes of dealing with alcohol. And that took away from the pleasures, because there was no more pleasure in those activities anymore, because I was trying to maintain a pain system dealing with the drinking and with alcohol. So that's another sign potentially, is that they're starting to isolate, they're starting to withdraw from things as well. Financials, there's a financial responsibility where they're not necessarily paying a bill, a bill that they would always take care of, and now you're getting a notice that they didn't pay the water bill, they didn't pay the electric bill, the mortgage is late. These are definite signs that there's something going on with them. There's a challenge happening here. Another big sign is risk. They're taking risks. And I can tell you right now, the biggest risk that that individual potentially dealing with an alcohol problem will take is that they'll get behind the wheel of a vehicle and they will drive. whether it's alone or whether it's a family member or whatever it may be, this is where the risk becomes a safety factor. And I'll be very clear about that too. And I can share once again from my own experience what that is like and how devastating that can be to a family and to the individual as well. Not to mention an innocent public bystander, whether they're driving or walking or whatever it may be, that could be put at risk and put at harm as a result of somebody who's not able to drive correctly because they're under the influence. Somebody who's gone through this process personally and professionally with all the patients I've worked with over the many years that have dealt with alcoholism, I will say that in the early stages of that alcoholism, there's a sense that you still can do the things that you normally would do and you're okay. In other words, you would have alcohol in your body, you would have that state change, but you get behind the wheel because you think you're still okay, because in your mind you think you're driving okay, when in reality you're really not. There was times where I actually thought I was driving and I was driving normally and I had my wife in the car, and she's like, you're drifting off to the side of the road. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And then she would say, no, yes, you're drifting off to the side of the road. And I would almost be adamant. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm driving on. No, well, of course I wasn't. And that's the state change of alcohol. And that's what also affects that process too. So that risk factor is something to be very concerned about and also to be aware of too. And we're going to talk about risks shortly, about what are some things that you need to do as well too. So next, let's talk about how it affects the family. How does this affect the family? Well, I'm going to share first a firsthand experience, and I'm going to also give you the clinical side to this too as well for the families that I work with right now professionally and some of their responses to it. But I'm going to really kind of get to this to a very personal level. I know my wife is engaged in this whole process of what we do here at Tiger Resilience, and she's aware of what I'm doing here, so she's actually okay with me sharing this information. I'm just obviously not going to disclose her name at all. So for her experience, one of the things that I started to do was obviously isolate the family in a sense too. To protect myself, I thought I was having to protect the family. One of the things that I did have as a challenge is I thought, well, maybe my drinking is a problem because of where I'm at, where I'm working. Maybe I need to change that. So I made what they call a geographical change. I moved 5 states away to another state, thinking that I would be able to make a better life for myself, for my family, for my son. And at that time when we moved, he was 2 years old. And I thought that would make a better transition and that I could actually overcome this challenge or this problem. And I would make the move. And then for a short period of time in that beginning move, I would be able to have some control on it. And again, remember, if you're trying to control something, you're already out of control. But I would think for a moment I was starting to have some control over it. But it did not take long for it to take and rear its ugly head full force on it. Because no matter where I go, there I was. And I think that's a takeaway when it comes down to geographical changes or job changes or anything that you're doing. Sometimes it's even relationship changes. Well, here's the deal. Wherever you go, there you are. So that person who's dealing with alcohol, it doesn't matter what they change, they're still going to be dealing with the alcohol problem. So with that being said, also, how does this affect family? Well, it's absolutely, positively one of the most horrific things that you can do and put a family member through. And if you are here watching this video, I can only ascertain that you're certainly having some of these experiences yourself. So at the end of the day, the challenges are really, I don't know what's going to happen. I have so much unknown. I can't predict the behaviors because they're erratic. They're not consistent. There's all of these variables that play into this that makes it so difficult for a family member to be able to do this. And I'll share again from my wife's firsthand experience. For us, it was just myself and my wife and my son, my 2-year-old son. And during this time, my wife did not know what to do. She was fearful that something was going to happen to me. She was fearful that I could possibly just, drive and kill myself. She was fearful that the drinking was actually going to kill me, which it would have if I had continued at the level I was at. These are a lot of concerns that put a lot of fear and anxiety into her life and struggled with this. She really, really struggled with it. So she had to find a way to almost disconnect from it, almost to make it like she was a third person out of herself and just work the functions. And then she shared after, years after my recovery many years ago, we had talked about this at great length. And she would say, I just got so involved with work and with our son that I just kind of almost had to block you out, meaning myself, in order for me to function, because that was the only way I can deal with it. And to have to deal with you on a first-hand basis every single day, it was just too much, and it became very overwhelming. And I totally can see from that point of view, because that's the exact same thing that the families that I work with today, from the clinical side, the professional side, are also dealing with as well. So this is an extremely significant problem that creates a lot of challenges for family members. Any family member. Could be siblings, it could be, again, your spouse. You could be a child of an adult parent who's actually struggling with this problem. So it impacts everyone. Addiction is a family disease. Even if it's just one person who is dealing with it, it is a family disease. So with that being said, some other things that she had to go through, of course, were the protection of the finances, okay? So that I was not able to not pay bills and create conditions where there was going to be some real devastating factors. So she learned early on that she should take over finances, or at least have a good sense of what was going on, money coming in, money going out. Now, with that being said, I was what you would call, I guess, a functioning alcoholic, because I did work. I was a professional. I was in the corporate world, and I did work professionally and was able to maintain that. Again, we're talking quite a few years back. This is almost 30 years, to be honest with you, to give you kind of a reflection of the time frame that this, what I'm sharing with you right now, was about 30 years ago. So during that time frame, she needed to keep control of the finances in order to keep the family safe. She would absolutely, positively not allow me to take our son in the car alone unless she was in the car and she could gauge for herself what my state and condition was. And it was very intuitive of her, and it was very smart of her. And I actually respected that even back then. I understood to the point where, yeah, I could potentially be dangerous, as much as I was trying to deny that, because there was a lot of processes in my own system. So this is part of something you may be going through right now with your loved one who is struggling with it. One of the main things that I work with when I'm dealing with families who are having issues with addiction, and we're talking specifically about alcoholism right now and alcohol, if there's a safety concern in your family, the safety concern is addressed first and foremost. And what I mean by that is that there are some individuals who have very volatile personalities. I fortunately was not one of those. I was one of the happy-go-lucky types of alcoholics, that you may call it. Actually, in the day, they called it the happy-go-lucky drunk. But there are some people that get very violent, and they become very violent, and they express that violence. Sometimes it starts out verbally, then it's emotionally, and then it becomes physically. So when you're in a case like that, if that's something you're dealing with at this moment right now, safety is your only thought process right now, regardless of that individual and how much you care for them or love them and want the best for them. Your safety and your family safety will always be first and foremost. So here's where you need to actually say, you know what? We need to separate. We need to move this condition to another place. We need to move that person to another place until this can be worked out and dealt with. Because if there's a safety issue, all the years I've been doing this, and for all the families that I've worked with over the years, when there's a safety factor and it's not addressed, it always ends bad for somebody. So if that's a consideration right now, where you're worried about something that can happen to one of your family members as a result of that person struggling with the alcohol problem, you need to create a wall, and this has to be separated. Okay, either that person is told they need to move out or move to somewhere else, or have to stay with a friend, or go, whatever it is that you need to do. And sometimes you have to be a little creative with this, but you have to be firm. And no matter how much they beg or plead to say, I'll change, I'm sorry, I'll change, I'm sorry, that will just happen repetitively. If you are safety's sake, those words don't mean anything. Right now, your safety does. So, and then we'll discuss communication in another video, where how do I start that communication process if this actually gets to a point where we have to separate because they are a danger to me and my family, in a sense. So other ways that it impacts the family as well, obviously it's a long-term psychological problem. What I'm sharing with, and when I had stopped drinking about 30 years ago, to this point and to this day, all these years later, I will share that, my wife and I often talk about it, and we go back into some of the tough stories. We had a lot of great experiences, but there were some bad experiences too as well. And she can reflect on that today, because she's able to have overcome it and let it go because, there was a transcendence, because I did change, and it was a change in the family, and everything turned around, and we became this, wonderful, happy-go-lucky family as a result of making that change. So with that being said as well, having that discussion, I can see in her the absolute hurt that when she talks about some of those experiences, she still has today, like a trauma event. Anything that was traumatic in life is never forgotten. It is always there. And sometimes there's some cues that come up, conversations, visual, music, a multitude of cues can come up and bring that trauma right back to life. And I can sense that in her. All these years later, 30 years later, she'll still have that sense in her. So this is a long-term, devastating challenge for families. Be aware of that, know that. Please do not make that as a guidance to say, well, then I have to just leave them and cut my losses or anything else like that. This video is created for you as a person who's concerned about a loved one because you're concerned because you love them, okay? Because you know that person deep down inside in here is that good person you always knew and remember. And again, I would ask you, please see the cycle of addiction video where we talk about that, where the character of the individual, that personal constitution of that person that you fell in love with or you care for, that person's still in here. Because addiction is a behavior, and what is happening is now that behaviors are exhibited outside of that person and they have lost control. So that person is just kind of stuffed down there. So this video is directed to people who have that type of relationship. If you don't have a strong relationship with an individual and you're having these types of stresses, then I would encourage you strongly to reevaluate your relationship and what are your intentions? What are the motivations? What is your desire in the long term? What do you see in 1 year and 3 years and 5 years? Let's say that person is struggling with alcohol and they stop and they get sober and they do the right things. Well, where do you see your relationship 1 year, 3 year, 5 year down the line? That will help you to determine what you do today. Okay. But again, this video is geared to people that have somebody they really care for and they want to help them, and they're going to do whatever they can do to help them with the exception of putting themselves in harm's way. So hopefully I can make that as clear as possible that there's a lot of devastation that happens with families. Now, my personal experience I just gave you is also exactly what happens on a clinical level. The families that I work with from my professional clinical practice is exactly the same problems that they go through to this day. The exact same thing. It's almost as if you can predict it, exactly what will happen. And they're struggling with these same exact issues that my wife went through in a sense too. So that will clarify some of the family experiences. Now, we're not going to get too involved right now because there are siblings, there are other family members that are affected by this. I'm just discussing a snapshot of my family because it can give you at least an understanding of it. But this same impact of my family, if I was to expand it by 10 people, the same impact. It's the same exact effect that's happening for all of them in a sense. Some take it a little bit more harder than others in a sense too, based on what that family dynamic is. So now you've identified that your loved one is struggling with alcohol. You actually believe they probably are an alcoholic. They're starting to create conditions that are becoming challenging in the household, in your relationship and in your life that are starting to raise flags. What can you do? There's 2 things that you can do for support right now from the beginning. 2 avenues that we're going to take. The first avenue is, and we'll discuss this first, is you want to be there to help them, but they're still active in their addiction and maybe still in a denial stage that they're not ready yet or willing to discuss treatment, or that if it was a discussion, they're just shooting that down right away. I'm okay. I don't need that. I'm fine, I can stop when I want to stop. When you start hearing those things and are adamant about staying the course, this is where I'm talking about for support. So what this support looks like is in different facets, and we're going to discuss each one of them. First and foremost, remember, you're caring for this person in here, but this person has kind of been hidden away a little bit because the behaviors are now exhibited from the addiction. And that addiction behavior is going to create a lot of different conditions. So your support can be very simple, laying down some basic guidelines that are discussed thoroughly and very adamantly about what are the things you can and cannot do, what are the things that you will or will not put up with. And the way to do this is to plan it and say, listen, you know what, if it's, let's say it's my spouse did this for me. So my wife came and says, listen, I want to talk with you. It's very serious. We need to sit down and have a conversation. I need you not to be drunk. I need you to not be at least drinking heavily at this point. I want to make time and we need to sit down and discuss it. And, of course I love my wife and my family. So it was all, yeah, sure. Okay. I'll be happy to sit down and talk with you. That is the conversation that you get to have with that individual, because you're making the time and you're getting the commitment from them to at least listen to you and understand what are the conditions that they're willing to put down. Now, my guidance for you is, again, safety is the first word I want you to keep remembering on this. There's no driving under the influence with any family member, period. Okay. In fact, the encouragement is that if you are driving and there's any issues, if you get pulled over, if you get a driving under the influence, that you will rest affirmed that car, whether it's insured under your family plan or even if it's with the individual, that you do not want that car in the family household any longer. You do not want that person driving anymore. And they can make a decision to say, well, no, I'm going to drive anyway. Well, they would need to leave. And you have to be very clear about that, because you don't want to bring that kind of traumatic events of that issue with somebody driving a dangerous weapon, such as a vehicle, into your life, in a sense. So, but if you can get the commitment to them that they're not going to be doing this behavior, if they drive, they go to work, they're functioning, you can fairly confidently say, okay, for the most part, I think that they're going to be okay. They return home and maybe their drinking is at night. Maybe it's down in a basement somewhere. Maybe it's in an office somewhere. Maybe wherever it might be, that it's kind of out of sight, but they're not going to be getting back in the car at 10 o'clock at night and then taking off, in a sense too. Okay. Make a very clear commitment right off the get-go that barrier is that this is one of the fundamental conditions. Let them know that you'll be there to support them and that your role and goal is to help them see that they have a problem. And if they don't recognize that right now, let them know that you will help them by helping them see what their problem is. And you're not going to give up on that, but you will not take the abuse, especially if it becomes any kind of psychological abuse. Again, I'm not talking about the physical, because we've already discussed that. And if you have an issue with the physical, it's already a separation, period, on that. But I'm talking about some of the emotional and psychological abuse that can happen, as a result of that person struggling, because that person will start to feel very disconnected. And I'm saying this from a professional clinical standpoint, and I'm saying this to you from a personal standpoint. I became very disconnected, though my heart was broken, because I knew that I was hurting my family, but I could not stop. At that point, I knew very clearly that there was a problem, but I could not stop, and I did not want to harm my family. So I was doing everything I could possibly do to hold it together. But I was failing, obviously, fairly miserably, because it was still starting to really take a toll on me and my life and my wife and my family as a whole. Having these boundaries set up front, right from the get-go, what you'll do, the support you'll give them, because your end goal is to get them the help that they need, because they need help. Maybe they don't recognize it now, but you do, and you are willing to be there for them to help them in that point when they get to that point, okay? Because your role here is really to be the power of influence. All right. And that is a major piece. And I can share with you the families that I work with over all these years and my own personal experience. It was that power of influence for somebody who cared for you, who believed in you, that will shift and transition that individual potentially to get into the treatment and get the help that they want. So that's why it's important to have this laid down right from the get-go, that you're going to be there to help support them. But with that being said, you also need to understand you got to take care of you. You have to take care of yourself. Self-care is absolutely the quintessential aspect of this, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody. And if you have a family, if you have children, if you have others involved with this, and even if it's just yourself, you have to take care of yourself, because if you're not there for yourself, you can't do anything for anybody. I worked with a family not too long ago where the husband was having a challenge with addiction, and the wife needed to work on her own experiences so that she could kind of disconnect from it and take care of herself. So we worked out a plan where she got active with some aerobic exercises. She joined it was a dancing class that she was able to do on Saturdays for herself. She took care of herself in the midst of this cyclone, because she needed to know that she could be stable and still fundamentally function and be okay with herself, in a sense. So just to re-emphasize, self-care is an imperative. Take care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. You need to take care of your cup, make sure it's full, okay? very powerful terms. I can share that's how my wife was able to overcome the challenges that she dealt with me all those years ago, because she was taking care of herself and my son, our son, and doing the right things to the best of her ability so that she could still function. And that's a very big piece to this. So another piece to what are the steps next too as well. What are you going to say and not say to the individual? You've already created the boundaries. You set up in some motions of the things that you're going to do and that they can and cannot do. Okay, you have your boundaries set up. Now, what are some of the things you can and cannot say? There's a lot of situations that are going to come up that you may feel very angry about, and you may react very reactively about, because your response is based on something that really irritated, or it could be absolutely a horrific issue or something said or whatever it may be. Be guarded with what you say, because again, the idea is you want to influence them into treatment. So if they say something or do something, you can point it out to them. Says, you know what, you said that was really hurtful and it was a horrible thing to say. And you can then emphasize by saying, you know what, I know you're sick and you don't know any better, and I want to help you. But what you said was very harmful and hurtful. And if it's something that really that's happening frequent, that needs to be on the boundary list. I won't put up with that at all either, in a sense too. So I work with families very professionally with this, that deal with this all the time, where they really have to understand that it's not personal, because a lot of times that person who's dealing with the addiction has a whole host of things going on. They don't know what to do, and they're going to take their frustration out on everybody and anyone. And unfortunately, it's always the person that you love the most that gets the brunt of it first and foremost. Again, I'm sharing from personal experience as well as clinical and professional. I know from my personal experience, a lot of my challenges and issues that I was dealing with, I didn't necessarily take them out directly on my wife, but I did it by neglect, by not at least being able to communicate with her, because I would just not talk. I would not discuss it. I would just kind of dismiss anything. I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. I never allowed that opportunity for that communication bridge, in a sense too. And again, we're going to be talking about in great detail about communication styles and how you do learn to communicate with your loved one. But right now, we're just trying to say, what do you say? Just don't do something that's going to create additional friction, and something also that, like the golden rule, don't do unto others, but understand that other person is not really that person that you know, because they have an addiction. It's a behavior, it's a characteristic that comes out. It's a Jekyll and Hyde kind of situation. That individual is not doesn't necessarily apply to the golden rule, but what you want to take from that is not to say something that will come back to you later on, in a sense. Don't take it personal. I would encourage you, if you're interested, read a book from a gentleman named Miguel Ruiz, and he talks about this process called the 4 Agreements. And it's a very powerful little tiny book that really expresses how you should really work on yourself and not worry about the world around you, and take things so directly to person, in a sense too. And again, I won't go into that book right now, but it is something I would certainly recommend you to check out. So now that you have the things that you're trying to say, so what are the next steps? Well, now you've given them the information, the resources, and the tools internally, even though they're still in a denial state. Now the goal is obviously to continue the influence to get them into the help they need. So now let's take the other support where they really are ready for treatment. You've talked about it. They're like, yeah, I know I'm struggling. And I said for myself, and again, I'll share with my own personal experience, again, as professional experiences too. And my personal experience, I knew I had to get something. I knew I had to do something. I had to address this. I knew I needed a treatment service to help me with this, because I couldn't do it on my own. All right. And so with that being said, I knew that I was getting to that point of being ready. And my wife knew that. So one of the things you want to do is, when you know somebody's getting ready for this next transition, is that first get some support. All right. And in fact, what I would encourage you to do is, throughout this entire process, make sure you have somebody you can lean on. Have somebody in your court, have a support person that you can go to. It could be another family member, it could be a friend. I don't care who it is. You just need somebody that you can call in those dark moments, who's got your back and is going to be there for you to help you. So get a support person first, then start to investigate and look into treatment programs. Looking in your area, very easy today versus 30 years ago to find treatment programs, because there's a ton of information out there on the web for you to be able to find. There's a lot of good programs. There's also a lot of questionable programs. It's difficult for me to say, based on where you are, which programs you should go. too, in a sense. But if you are interested, you can look at our link below to our website and you can contact us and we can give you some free, no cost guidance, and depending on what your area is, and we'll let you know what some of the better treatment programs are in your area. Once again, I say just go to our link below in the website and go to our contact form, and on there you'll find the option where you can say, I'm looking for help for my husband, for my wife, my son, my daughter, and we're in Alabama, whatever it may be. You give us that information and we'll help pick out the right resources for you to use, the better resources, because we have the ability to be able to define what are the better programs and not, from what we've been doing for almost over 50 years right now. So if they're ready, you have to have some of this stuff ready to go for them. You have to have a treatment program ready for them to go. So once you found that program, you're making contact with them and you're going to say, hey, my spouse, my son, my significant other, my best friend, whatever that person is who's struggling with the alcoholism, has an issue with an addiction, and they think they're ready for help. They want the help. And I want to know the first and second and third and fourth steps to your program. What are the things we can do? And they'll give you very specific instructions. You won't be able to talk for your loved one. They will have to communicate with the individuals doing the assessments, because there's a lot of laws regarding privacy and HIPAA and things like that you can't necessarily really get involved with. The individual will have to do that as an adult. If they're a child, it's a different story, but as an adult, you have to be letting them be involved with that initial call too, because they'll have to do that initial assessment, potentially on the phone or just going into the program itself. And then you coordinate the transportation. You set in motion and let them know and reassure them that you're going to be there for them. So their goal and role right now is to seek the help that they need. The door is open for them right now. These businesses, these treatment facilities will either have a transportation service available, or you will be the transportation service, or you will hire a transportation service. Okay. I'd be concerned with getting something like an Uber, honestly. But if that's what you had, if it was an Uber or Lyft or a service like that, and that's all you had is available to you, please do what you need to do to get them into the treatment program. But I would avoid that more so. I would prefer to see if you were to do it as a personal contact, if you can do it, or if the treatment program themselves can supply and provide the rides, because they're going to be taking a little bit of clothing with them for a couple of days. They're going to be planning for a little bit of a stay away. Okay. And I'll explain the treatment process shortly and what that looks like and what that is. They're ready for treatment. You found a place. You made the call. They're saying, okay, we're ready. We'll do a quick intake with them on the phone. You can give them all the basic information that they need, the name, rank, serial number, address, all that kind of stuff, any insurance providers and so on. And then at that point, they'll make a phone call potentially with that person or the assessor, and then they'll have some small conversation, and then the transportation is arranged and they go into treatment. Now they're into treatment. They're on their own. They're on this new journey. One of the biggest issues that I have found with all the families I work with is that they did not know what was the treatment process for their loved one dealing with that addiction. If they went into an inpatient hospital setting treatment, what was that like? What were they going to do? What happened with that? And I'm going to explain that to you in a minute, and exactly how that works. And we're just talking about alcohol right now. So everything I'm going to share from a treatment dynamic is about alcohol. There's different drugs that have different treatment processes and protocols. We're just going to be talking about alcohol in this particular video. So now that your loved one is on their way, they're on the treatment, and you don't know what to do. Well, the first things you're going to need to do is take a breath. Take a deep breath, take a moment, and certainly give yourself a pat on the back that you got to this stage and you're able to get them the help that they need. Start to be hopeful, because here now is where the things start to change. And it's going to be up to you to kind of get yourself right-sided to say, you know what? This person now has a shot at this and a chance. Okay, things are different now from this point forward, and I need to start to see the world differently. Okay, so the very first thing is take care of yourself. Do something nice for yourself right off the bat. I don't care what that is. If it's getting yourself a treat, going to the movies, whatever it is, it's not a celebration that they left. It's a celebration that you made that commitment to stay with them, and they're off on their next journey. So do something nice for yourself right now. After that, you're going to make a plan, and that plan is going to have to include a few different things. First, if there's alcohol in the household, you're going to have to remove it. If you drink occasionally, My encouragement to you here at this point is that try to avoid that in the beginning. If you're okay with not taking a glass of wine on a Saturday night with your dinner for at least a short period of time, and when I mean short period of time, at least 90 days, 100 days, 4 months, preferably to 6 months, but at least that first 3 months. Try to avoid bringing alcohol into the household for when they return, so that you can create a safe environment, almost like your young child going into a playpen, and there's certain things you're going to put in there to keep them safe and certain things you will not put in there. This is the same mindset here. You want to make sure that you're getting that person set up for success. So getting rid of alcohol in the household is definitely the first step to it too as well. The second step potentially is, and this is a big one because there's more likely than not going to be a stash of alcohol in all different places. Okay, and I will share from my own personal experience. When I went in and received treatment, and I came out of treatment, and I got back home, and my wife said to me very clearly, said, "I understand that you have stash. We have to go find out where these bottles are. We have to get rid of the stash. You can't have that as a backup." And I knew from the early stages of my recovery that that's something I didn't want anyway. But to be quite honest, there was some things that I hid. I had no idea that they were where they were, and found some things 5, 10, 15 years later, would find semblance of something that I stashed somewhere that couldn't be found. And all of a sudden there it was, like hiding way up in the back end of a rafter on top of a little box, or, just some really obscure thing that, you think as a active alcoholic, you're being clever with, in a sense too. So, but she's was there to help me get rid of the stash. And this is going to be your role, is to help them when they get back, to let them know we're going to have to revisit this and go through and find your stash. You cannot keep any bottles around here, and I know stuff is hidden. And it's okay because they'll be in that early stage of recovery. I don't think you're going to have any problems with this whatsoever. The families I work with right now, it's usually pretty cut and clear. They're like, okay, I'm ready for this. Yep, let's go get these bottles and get this stuff out of here. Okay, so that is one of the first things that you're going to be doing, getting the alcohol out of the household. The next thing is that you're going to have to watch your expectations. Expectations have to be taken as a day-to-day basis. Live in the 24 hours you have. Just live with the daily expectations. You're not going to drink today. We're going to try to have the best day possible. We're going to start taking care of some of the wreckage that may be potentially evident from your alcoholism. I can share from my personal experience. There were some things I needed to take care of from a financial standpoint, as well as from a personal standpoint, that needed to be dealt with from the beginning. So those are the things that you took day by day, little by little, as you crept through on the journey to take care of these things. So these are things that you have to prepare yourself for, to be ready to do, in a sense. You have to understand you are going to be the responsible person here, taking ownership, but also taking the lead. And what I mean by that is the individual will be on their own journey and they're living their own life, but you're going to be taking the lead when it comes to creating the conditions that will help support them. And one of the big things that will help support them is that you will be there to guide them. All right? Because when they get out of early treatment, they have the ability now to stop using the drug, alcohol in this case. And because they have the ability, that's self-evident for them, and they see that, like, wow, I stopped drinking. I can tell you from my own personal experience. When I got back, I felt great. It was amazing in just a short period of time what it was like to feel again, in a sense. So with that being said, that individual is still going to be on the journey. So you're going to still be the lead role, because your goal is to help create an accountability system. Remember, the person will have the ability. You're going to create accountability. And the accountability is just a daily diligence, checking in, keeping the fires going with recovery by being supportive. All right. And then at that point, because when they get out of the treatment programs, good treatment programs, they will have an aftercare plan. That aftercare plan will include a multitude of different things that they will have to do, that's requested that they do, to maintain their recovery and their journey, in a sense. For myself, I was active very much so with the 12-step program, as well as doing some counseling service for myself as well. too. So I utilize both of those services. There's a lot of different things you can do, and that doesn't just mean you have to be in a 12-step program. There's a lot of other ways to achieve these results and these goals, but getting the right systems in place will be part of the treatment program when they do the aftercare planning, and they'll be able to help you with that too as well, because you'll also have communication with them, because your communication with them will also help ensure that they are going to be getting your loved one on the right path, in a sense. And all good treatment programs always want to try to involve the family members with them as well. So now that you have set all these conditions, you have this place and you have all these things going, and now you got your loved one here, now you start your journey in recovery. Here's how this whole process works. So what happens in treatment? The big question a lot of people do not understand. Just to reference really quick, my experience working in this field for 26 years as a clinician, a therapist, as a counselor, and a program director, and a clinical director. My experience in this from the clinical aspects, also personal experience, is going to share with you. This is exactly how this process plays out. If they're going in there for just an alcohol withdrawal treatment, that's generally a 2 to 3 day process, all right? Alcohol, if they have a dependence, is probably one of the most dangerous drugs of all drugs that you can withdraw from, meaning that if they've been doing it for a long period of time and they're going to stop, they will need medical assistance to do that, because it can be very dangerous. There's a lot of factors that play into this, and in fact, people have gone into seizures and have died as a result of alcohol withdrawal that was not managed properly. It was not managed medically. There's a term called DTs, delirium tremens, which can happen and impact and affect them, that can create a lot of physical conditions that can be life-threatening. That's why it's imperative. Alcohol definitely should seek inpatient treatment, at the very least, outpatient medical treatment, okay? My encouragement strongly, it should be one of those two things. If somebody's been dependent on alcohol, it's imperative to help them be successful and also to survive and not have any other complications, in a sense too. So they come into treatment, they're given medication, and different facilities offer different types of medications. For the most part, it could be potentially a phenobarbital, a barbiturate, or it could be a benzodiazepine, which is used, lorazepam. There's Librium. There's a lot of different things. Depends on the facility that they'll use in order to relax the body system as it's processing out the alcohol, as the ethanol is processing through, and the body is starting to compensate normally and rationally. That's what these medications do. So that first day or so, they're going to be kind of a little off game. Then they'll kind of be lethargic. And then usually by the first full day, they're going to start getting some spring in their step. They'll start having some food, some eating habits will come back. They'll start to feel some normalcy in a sense too. So usually within that first 24 hours, you've got a good shot where they're starting to be normal again and kind of getting themselves. A lot of programs, and I'm going to say that the programs I would certainly recommend have a group therapy element of it, which is a major part to this, as well as a therapy level to it, a counselor or a therapist that's working with them at the facility as well too. A lot of programs will have case management services that will assist the therapist in getting the aftercare planning put together as well. And there's even programs, and the most successful programs today more than ever usually use peer support help. And those are individuals who are working for these treatment programs, but they are also themselves individuals who have gone through the addiction themselves, and they come in and work as not as a clinician, but as a support person in a sense too, almost like an aid to the team, the treatment team. They're there as an aid to help that individual, because they can talk and relate to them on that one-on-one basis very much, which makes Tiger Resilience so unique, is that I bring that perspective to our program here because I have both ends of the spectrum that I have been working through. I've been through there in the personal experience, and I have the clinical background that does it from the medical and the clinical side to it as well. So that individual is going to be there approximately 2 to 3 days. probably no more than 3 days, depending on the severity or if there's any other medical issues or anything underlying with it as well. There's a good chance that a good program will allow or do a psychiatric visit as well. Now, don't get alarmed by that. Psychiatric is just to rule out any other conditions, because there are psychiatric conditions, affective disorders specifically, bipolar, manic depression, major depressive disorders, agoraphobic. There's a lot of conditions that potentially trigger addiction, in an individual. So they'll want to rule out that there's no other issues going on. Most cases, the individual has a history of some other mental health challenges in their life that generally will be known a little bit during the intake, but if not, at least they'll rule that out, that there's no other conditions or anything else going on in a sense too. So once that's been cleared, they make a decision on whether they would need other treatment in addition to the person dealing with the alcoholism, and those terms are called co-occurring. And those co-occurring disorders are, again, somebody is bipolar and they've had that experience as a child, or ADHD, and that's what helped precipitate the addiction, and they're dealing with the addiction, so they'll treat both of those at the same time. That's what the co-occurring means, that they'll be doing that simultaneously. It's not one or the other, it's always the whole person, treat the whole person in a sense. So generally after that 2 to 3 days, I can tell you right now from a professional experience as well as a personal experience, you feel like a brand new person. You'll come out of it. There'll be a little bit of nervousness, definitely, and that's a healthy nervousness. There's 2 types of stress in our world. We have a distress, not a good stress, and we have a eustress, which is a good stress. Having somebody who's going on and starting a new journey is a eustress moment. It's going to be stressful, but it's a good stress, because it's a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of positive attributes that will be coming forward as a result of the change in the behaviors in a sense too. So that's really, in a nutshell, what a treatment cycle is like. There's a very big process with it. Nursing is involved. There's usually nursing aides involved with it. There's usually a nurse practitioner. There'll always be a medical doctor who will do the medical treatment to make sure there's nothing else medically going on. The bigger and better programs will always have a psychiatrist available that will also offer that service to just rule out that there's no other issues with them too. And then when they're set on their way, you'll have a plan in place. And now it'll be up to you to take that plan and enforce it with your loved one as they go forward. Remember, they've gotten out of treatment. They have the ability. You now become the accountability person. Okay? So with all that being said, now you have your loved one on their journey. You're beginning your life anew. I will share from personal experience, one of the most cathartic experiences was very early on to have transcended that adversity and the challenges that took me from that one stage to another. And it literally is as a term is known as a paradigm, how you see the world, shifted literally from one view to another, from that as an active person dealing with alcohol to somebody who's changed their life and sees the world from a different lens. And it is such a empowering process. And there's a lot of excitement with it. But be aware that life is still life. Life is never fair. Life is very unjust at times. And there will always be something that happens. There will be something that'll go wrong. There's something that will go sideways. That's just life. The preparation process right now for you is getting ready to be able to handle those moments when things aren't going so perfectly, helping that person with coping skills. And those are things that you will also learn about as you're going through this process. How can you assist them? What are some of the processes that can help them when they deal with anxious moments? They will have learned some of these techniques if they get treatment, which I encourage strongly, whether it be counseling or therapy after, in addition to support programs. Again, whether it's a 12 steps peer support program, whatever that maybe would look like, it's having somebody there who's gone through a like-minded experience that can help them as well. But having all those tools and resources will give them the skill sets to learn how to cope, how to deal with those emotions, how to deal with that, dealing with and creating a conditions that will help them in that process of early recovery, that will give them the tools and the resources, the coping skills. How do they handle the stresses when they're happening at them every day? What are the processes that they can take that will help them calm down, that will bring and keep this calm in many ways. And there's a lot of techniques, and that's what these different therapists and programs will offer you, because there's so many things that they can do. And then today, with the advent of the internet and all of the technology we have available today, it's never been easier to really get the help and the resources you need than it's ever been before. Okay. So with all that being said, that change in that individual's life, you have just set somebody on a new path. That person is now on a new journey. And I want to thank you right off the bat for having the wherewithal to do this for that person. I will share with you a very personal note on how and what it was that took me to go from that person struggling with alcohol to the person that you see in front of you here today. In my more despair moments, at that dark moment in my life, at that point where I knew I needed help, didn't know what to do, but was just not committed yet because I was too unsure of what to do. And I was on the couch. I was half passed out. I was certainly not drinking to get drunk anymore. That was long gone. It was just to maintain from being sick and from shaking to death as a result of withdrawal. And on that couch, and my wife said to me, she said, "Don't you know that your life is worth living?" And for some reason or another, whether it was a divine intervention, whether it was a karma, whatever it was, but those words stuck to me and struck me to the core. And when I heard that, it shifted something in me internally. It was like it was an epiphany. It was a light went off and like, oh my God, wait a minute. My life is worth something. Somebody believed in me and saw in me that I had worth and value. And your role and goal is to help your loved one with that process, is to have that belief in them, the worth and value of their life to help them, because that truly, absolutely and positively is the takeaway. And it is what saved my life. It changed my life to this day. You know, though there are many different things that could be said and different phrases, and people have different experiences on it. I'm just sharing one from a personal experiences. Those words to me, my life was worth living because somebody else cared and supported and saw that within me, is what helped me start that journey and get to me where I'm at today as well. I will share also in my corporate days, I was in a leadership role and worked in management. And I learned a long time ago, one of the best definitions of leadership that kind of parallels what I'm sharing right now with somebody in early recovery from alcoholism, going from that, transcending that adversity to the new person, is leadership effectively is when a leader is a person who is going to believe in another individual so thoroughly and so convincingly that they come to see it in themselves. And that's what I mean by what my wife said to me. By giving me that confidence because she saw in me what I was capable of, that is what shifted the world for me. That is also what potentially can help you and your loved one in making that shift, for the help to see that, to believe in them, to know that person in here is coming back, and that the behavior and the outside characteristics of alcoholism is now put to bed. So thank you once again for being there for your loved one, for the wherewithal of doing this again. And I'd like to also thank you for taking time to review our videos, to sit down and go through this content. I would ask, if you find any value in this, could you please consider at least liking this video so we can pay that forward to other families who are in need, or at least possibly subscribing to our channel so that you can keep up to date with our videos. I have production videos coming out every week, and we are talking about a host of different topics, not just addiction, but behaviors related to it and behaviors related to the human condition. There's a whole program I'll be putting out that'll be talking about communication and communication skill sets and how do we deal with that. These are very practical experiences and behaviors that every human being benefits from, in a sense too. So I would encourage you, if you could, please subscribe to our channel if you find value in this too as well. I have all the links to the discussion points that we have here that you'll find below in the description. And again, I thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I hope that you find value in this. I wish you nothing but the best going forward with your loved one. Know that there is hope, there is help, and that you can make this change, and that you can come out on the other end a happier and fulfilled person. Just believe that it can be done. I wish you all the best today. I'll look forward to speaking with you very soon.